That's the sound of the men working on the chain gang.
12:35. This is the John Gambling Show. Frank Morano here. Very, very happy to be filling in for John. John's going to be back on Monday. Tomorrow, you guys are in for a real treat. You know who's going to be here tomorrow? Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino. The Rob Astorino that ran for governor last year against Andrew Cuomo. He is an expert on this whole Common Core and education thing. So he's going to have a unique take. You can bet he's going to have a unique take. I'm looking forward to hearing him. Rob's actually a radio guy. A lot of people don't realize that, but I work with Rob when he was working at ESPN Radio and I was working at another radio station, and we actually shared an office. His office was adjacent to mine. So he's a great guy and certainly knows radio well. I'm looking forward to hearing him. Now, imagine this. Imagine you are a simple, law-abiding locksmith living in Coconut Creek, Florida. Everything's going well for you. And then all of a sudden, you're arrested for some crimes you don't commit. Well, it's actually more likely that this can happen to you. Well, not if you don't live in Coconut Creek, Florida. It's actually more likely that this can happen to you than you realize. And I have really, if there's one mission that I have in broadcasting, it's repairing the criminal justice system and shining a light on some of the real problems with prosecutorial misconduct and people being arrested and going to jail when they're innocent. And there's a fascinating new book out, and I can't wait to read it. I haven't read it yet, but it's a fascinating new book out. It's called Wrongly Charged. Very, very pleased to be joined by its author, David Merkatz, right now. David, good afternoon. Thanks for coming on the radio with me.
Thanks for having me on.
David, tell us your story. How did you first become ensnared in the criminal justice system? What were you charged with? What happened to you? What was the result?
I'll give you a brief outline. I actually was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I moved down to South Florida in the 80s, late 80s, and in Florida we don't have any regulation, unlike New York City where you have to be fingerprinted to be a locksmith. In South Florida there is absolutely no licensing.
Well, David, all our people in Brooklyn are saying, well, that's what you get for moving to Florida. Why didn't you stay in Brooklyn?
Actually, it was good because everybody can come down here and be a locksmith.
Right.
The business is very competitive, and when we hit the year 2005, and they did away with the Yellow Pages is gone and stuff like that, we came up with a creative idea for advertising. It probably wasn't a nice idea, but we put up some websites and we registered them legally in Florida, and they were similar to larger companies that were established. So, for example, if the name of your company was ABC Lock Shop and Security Center, we registered ABC Locksmith. And we did that. The sites looked nothing like the competitors. They actually had a disclaimer on there at the bottom of the website which said, we are not the other company, and you can click here to be redirected. And we did that for 7 years. Few complaints here and there, but mostly by the competitor because he was losing business.
Naturally. And just so you know, this is actually something that's pretty common. It's even common in politics. A bunch of the Ted Cruz domain names were purchased to redirect to pro-Obama websites. So this happens actually all the time.
And, before we did it, we checked with 3 different attorneys, a criminal attorney, a trademark attorney, and a civil attorney, and they all gave us the green light. They said, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. The worst thing that could happen is that you may be charged with a trademark infringement, and you'll have to stop doing it, which, I said, okay, but there's no criminal act. Absolutely not. It happens every day, just like you said. But we did it to one of the companies in a town of Palm Beach, a very rich area. And one of the companies that we did it to happens to do all the work for the town of Palm Beach, including the police department. So we got a phone call in February of 2013, and we have a few people that are independent contractors that work for us, and we called them up and said, I have a rekey to change the cylinder on a lock. And he went over to the house, and when he got over there, he knocked on the door, and the guy says, yes, I need this lock rekeyed. He did the job, and when he got done, the guy said, how much do I owe you? He gave him the keys. He tried the lock. He said it was $135. And when he got done, he walked out of the door, and they knocked him to the ground and said, you're under arrest for burglary of an occupied dwelling, grand theft, and impersonation. And that's how the story...
Whoa. Well, that sounds very odd. Now, obviously, wait, they were claiming that your act of having a similar website title was grand theft and impersonation?
You know what the funny part of it was is that, you know how the state, after they review the case for 30 days, when they filed the formal charges 30 days later, they actually dropped the impersonation charge, which I found odd, and they kept the grand theft and burglary charge on him.
So then, well, first of all, what prosecutor would bring a case like this?
It was to teach us a lesson, basically. They didn't like that we were stealing business, which happens every day, and I don't think it was a police matter. It wasn't something nice to do, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it was a criminal matter. It happens every single time I turn the news on. There's somebody that's copying a product or a service.
And so what happened?
So we're not finished. Then about a day later, one of my other technicians who had done work in the same area got a call from the same detective and said, I'd like you to come in for an interview. We're conducting an investigation. I advised him not to go in because after what happened to the other guy, you know, I didn't think it was a good idea. But he didn't listen. He went in. After the interview, they put him in handcuffs, the same 3 charges. Yep.
Wow.
And then months went by, and I didn't hear anything, but I knew that since I was the person that put up the websites along with my partner, sooner or later they were going to come to me. So I retained an attorney, and in August of 2013, I got a phone call. He says, David, I have bad news for you. What's the matter? He says, there's a bench warrant for your arrest for a slew of crimes, money laundering, organized scheme to defraud. I mean, it was unbelievable. I was shaking in my pants.
And so did you go to trial?
Well, what happened was, since the police officer was very nice, and he didn't just come to the door and break the door down, I got a hold of a bail bondsman. He was able to ascertain that the bond was going to be $19,500, so I paid him his fees. I went the next day and I surrendered myself, so I didn't actually have to be dragged out of the, into the street and everything. And knowing how to work the system is very good. And I was able to get in and out within 5.5 hours. And when they filed the formal charges, they actually also dropped one of the charges. Now, because I was the one that erected the thing, and they had conducted an 8-month investigation on this with forensic experts, it's an amazing thing how much time they spent on this.
And how much money?
I don't know the exact amount, but I'm going to say it was several $1 million for 8 months investigation. But I don't know for sure. But the thing is that they had a little egg on their face, and somebody had to pay for all this time. So they made me an offer a year later and said, you can plead guilty to a misdemeanor, petty theft, or you can go to trial.
Wow. Okay, and we're talking with David Merkatz. He's got a new book out, which, again, I haven't read, but I will encourage you to read it. It's called Wrongly Charged. You can learn about it at wronglycharged.com. So, David, what occurred here, you did nothing illegal. You did basically some, at worst, unethical business practices, which are very common in politics, in journalism, and in business. And then they put you in a position where they made you an offer to plead guilty in order to have this whole thing over with, and did you?
Well, here's the problem. Most people plead guilty to crimes because of 2 words, fear and money. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to go to trial, my attorney said it'll be $35,000. And win or lose, unfortunately, in the criminal case, the defendant doesn't get to recover. So if the jury came back and said, we, the defendant, find not guilty, I'm still out $35,000 on top of the $60,000 I already spent for this case. So with an offer of a misdemeanor, petty theft, and adjudication withheld in Florida means you won't have a criminal conviction at the end of the probationary period, I said to myself, let me just do it. And that's what they do to people because they run out of money.
That is awful. So you took a guilty plea when you didn't do anything wrong.
Right, because they offered me an adjudication withheld. And that's why I decided, with all my knowledge of what I went through, to come out with a book to teach people what people actually go through and why they plead guilty. And I teach people how to seal and expunge a crime after you do a plea. There's ways to do that.
I think this is outrageous. Here in New York, especially in your old hometown of Brooklyn, the borough my parents came from, it seems like every week we're hearing about a different person that was wrongfully imprisoned for 2 decades. Last week we heard of a man who was on death row for almost 3 decades when he didn't do anything wrong. Now, give me, David, obviously your case is a little different. It wasn't a case of the police thinking you committed a crime when you didn't. It was a case of them knowing that you did something which happened to not be a crime, but they abused the criminal justice system in a manner in order to extract a measure of revenge from you. Give me your prescription for how we can stop this. How can we as a society say what happened to David Merkatz will not happen again, and what happened to all these young men in Brooklyn who were locked away for 25 years for murders they never committed? How can we make sure that doesn't happen again?
Well, see, here's the problem. In a civil case, if the criminal cases were treated like civil cases, if you sue me and you win, you can recover court costs and attorney's fees. Now, if the prosecutor knew, because this was a case which they knew was a civil matter, definitely wasn't criminal, if they knew that they had to reimburse 3 people for all the court costs and all the attorney's fees, because, by the way, the other 2 people, all charges were dismissed, as I described in the book, they would have never done it, because then they would have had to pay all my legal costs, all the other guy's legal costs, all the bail bonds costs, and all that. If that was known up front with criminal cases, if you lose, the prosecution has to pay for both sides. They wouldn't file charges when they knew they really...
It's so interesting that you say that. A friend of mine, my friend Mario, he's a former prosecutor in Staten Island, and he is concerned with the overzealous nature of prosecutions. And what he says is that not only should they have to pay, but the money should actually be taken out of their office budgets. And all of a sudden, if they are going to have less money because they're behind wrongful prosecutions, you'll see them being a lot more discriminating with who they prosecute.
Absolutely. I'm sure my case was a borderline case, and they realized that we don't have a lot of money. I mean, here I was just a locksmith. I didn't have all this money, so I took the plea. The other 2 charges on the other 2 people wound up being dismissed, but they went through $20,000 and $30,000 in legal costs, so they got punished even though they didn't do anything wrong.
Well, David, I give you a lot of credit. A lot of people would want to try and get this issue behind them and just kind of, since their record was expunged, have conviction, arrest, confession erased everywhere from their name. And I give you all the credit in the world for trying to raise awareness for this. And again, I want to encourage everybody to go to your website, wronglycharged.com, and check out this book. And I wish you the best of luck with getting some of these reforms enacted.
Okay, and I just want to let you know the book is available at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and Books A Million. And if anyone has any questions or anything I can help them with, I have a toll-free number, 844-WRONGLY.
Wow. Hey, thank you very, very much, David. Best of luck.
Thanks for having me on.
Sure thing.